Y'all, I want to start this morning with a road. Not a famous road, though it is one of the most famous roads in the world. I want to start with what is happening to it and what that tells us about something much larger and much more consequential than the road itself. California Highway 1, the Pacific Coast Highway, the road that hugs the Big Sur coastline along some of the most dramatic and most photographed terrain in the United States, has collapsed into the Pacific Ocean more than once in recent years. Not damaged, not partially undermined, collapsed. 2 full lanes gone, leaving a 150-foot wide gap where a road used to be. The pavement carried down to the ocean in a debris flow that overwhelmed every drainage structure in its path. And that collapse was not a freak event. It was the predictable outcome of a coast that is actively, measurably, documentably moving landward, eroding, retreating, crumbling in ways that the United States Geological Survey, NASA, the California Geological Survey, and every coastal scientist who has been paying attention for the past decade has been documenting and warning about and publishing peer-reviewed research on. California's coast is in serious danger, not from a single catastrophic event that has not happened yet, from a slow, grinding, relentless process that is already underway, already claiming land and infrastructure and homes and iconic highways, and that is going to accelerate in ways that the most current science says are now essentially unavoidable. And I think every person who lives near, works near, loves, or simply cares about the California coast deserves to hear the full, honest, science-grounded version of this story. Not the alarming tabloid version, not the dismissive everything is fine version, but the real one. Let me start with the cliffs, because the cliffs are where the most visible and most immediately dramatic coastal erosion is happening, and because the rate of cliff retreat along the California coast is one of the clearest expressions of how serious the current situation is. A 2022 study by USGS researchers examined cliff collapse events along the California coast and found major collapses in locations that span the length of the state. Palos Verdes in Los Angeles, Big Sur along the central coast, Martins Beach and Fort Funston near San Francisco, and sites along the northern Lost Coast. The rates of cliff retreat documented in that study reached up to 16 feet per year at the most vulnerable locations. 16 feet of coastline gone in a single year at locations that have had buildings and roads and public infrastructure perched near their edges for decades on the assumption that the cliff would be there for the foreseeable future. The assumption was wrong. The California Geological Survey has been documenting cliff retreat as a systematic, statewide phenomenon, not a localized problem limited to a few unstable sites, but a pervasive feature of the California coastal environment that is expressing itself differently at different locations, but is present essentially everywhere that coastal bluffs meet the Pacific Ocean. The mechanism that drives cliff erosion is simple, physically intuitive, and essentially impossible to stop through any engineering intervention that does not involve armoring the entire coastline from Crescent City to the Mexican border. Ocean waves attack the base of coastal cliffs during storms and high tide events, undermining the material at the bottom of the bluff and eventually causing the overhanging material above to collapse. As sea levels rise, the point where waves attack the cliff base moves progressively higher on the bluff face, exposing more material to wave action and accelerating the rate of undercutting. California's coastal bluffs are made primarily of sedimentary rock, sandstone, mudstone, siltstone, that is naturally susceptible to wave attack in a way that harder volcanic or metamorphic rock is not. The California coast is essentially a sequence of wave-vulnerable sedimentary bluffs interspersed with beach environments, and all of it is retreating under the combined pressure of wave action, groundwater saturation from winter rains, and El Niño-driven storm sequences, and the long-term background of sea level rise that is measurably accelerating every decade. The sea level rise story at the California coast is one that NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory has been tracking through satellite altimetry, the technique of bouncing radar signals off the ocean surface from orbit to measure its height with millimeter precision. What that satellite data shows is that sea levels along the California coast have been rising, but unevenly, in a way that reflects both the global signal of ocean warming and the regional signals of Pacific Ocean circulation patterns that periodically amplify or suppress the local rate of rise. The El Niño event of 2015 and 2016 produced a temporary sea level spike along the California coast that was among the most significant in the modern satellite record. Not because of long-term sea level rise alone, but because El Niño ocean dynamics pile warm water against the west coast, temporarily raising sea levels above their background trend by several inches. During that event, the combination of elevated sea levels and El Niño-driven storms produced extraordinary coastal damage, precisely the kind of damage that the USGS's coastal storm modeling system, COSMOS, has been built to predict and to help emergency planners anticipate. The Great Highway in San Francisco eroded by an average of 55 meters. That is over 180 feet in a single winter during the 2009 to 2010 El Niño, requiring a $5 million emergency revetment at the base of the bluff to prevent further loss. What happened in that one winter in San Francisco is the kind of episodic, rapid coastal change that the current trajectory of sea level rise is going to make more frequent, more severe, and more geographically extensive. The infrastructure story is the one that I think is most underappreciated in the public conversation about California coastal erosion, and it deserves specific, detailed attention. Highway 1 is the most famous piece of coastal infrastructure being threatened by cliff erosion, but it is far from the only one. The California coast hosts railroad lines carrying military and freight transport that hug the bluffs above the ocean in Orange County and San Diego County, infrastructure of national strategic importance that is already experiencing erosion pressure, and that the California Department of Transportation has been working to protect with revetments and monitoring. The coast hosts wastewater treatment plants. 15 of them will be exposed to flooding with just 3 feet of sea level rise, according to a study cited by the California Legislative Analyst's Office, growing to 36 facilities at 6 feet of rise. The facilities in the San Francisco Bay region are particularly vulnerable, accounting for 30 of those 36 statewide. When a wastewater treatment plant is inundated by coastal flooding, when the plant that processes the sewage for hundreds of thousands of people loses function. Because ocean water has overwhelmed its operational systems, the public health consequences are not limited to the immediate area of the plant. They extend throughout the sewage service area of every municipality whose wastewater flows through that plant. This is not a hypothetical future problem. It is a problem that coastal engineers and public health officials in California are actively grappling with right now, in 2026, as they try to understand which plants are most vulnerable and what the cost of protecting them or relocating them would be. The community of Carlsbad in San Diego County has become one of the clearest illustrations of what coastal erosion looks like at the neighborhood level, the human scale version of the statewide statistics. Local officials there have been publicly acknowledging that the road running along their coastal bluffs may not be indefinitely survivable in its current form. During high tide, ocean waves come within just a few feet of a stretch of road known locally as the Dip. The city has placed boulders along the road's seaward edge to try to slow the erosion of the sand supporting the road. But as the sand continues to disappear, carried away by longshore currents, not replenished by the beach nourishment processes that used to supply it, and increasingly attacked by wave action as sea levels creep up, the boulders are fighting a losing battle against the Pacific Ocean. A local official was quoted saying something that I think deserves to be repeated. No matter what your perspective is on climate, the coastline is eroding and it is coming in. That is not a political statement. That is the observation of someone who has been watching a specific stretch of California coastline for years and can see with their own eyes what is happening to it. The tsunami piece of the California coastal danger story is the one that exists on a completely different timescale from the slow erosion and sea level story. Not gradual, not measurable in millimeters per year, but sudden, violent, and capable of arriving with 15 to 30 minutes of warning on a day when there is no storm, no visible threat, nothing in the sky or the sea to tell the people on California's beaches and coastal streets that something is coming. The California Geological Survey updated its statewide tsunami hazard maps in 2025, and the updated maps expanded the inundation zones in multiple communities compared to the previous versions. In Los Angeles County, the updates expanded the mapped tsunami inundation areas in Long Beach, including along Ocean Boulevard and Belmont Shore, and in Malibu, Santa Monica, Venice, Marina del Rey, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, and San Pedro. The ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles are identified by the Geological Survey as areas of particular concern because the port terrain is essentially flat, low-lying industrial land with very few roads that could serve as evacuation routes. The Geological Survey specifically noted that flooding to the extent possible in an extreme scenario would inundate almost all of the land in the ports and some surrounding communities. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach together are the entry point for approximately 40% of all goods imported into the United States. What happens to those ports in a major tsunami is not just a California problem. It is a national economic problem. San Francisco's updated tsunami maps showed significant increases in the mapped hazard areas in the financial district, at the foot of Market Street, and in parts of North Beach. The Embarcadero BART and Mooney stations, two of the busiest transit hubs in the Bay Area, used by hundreds of thousands of commuters daily, are now within the mapped tsunami inundation zone. The financial district itself, home to some of the highest density commercial real estate in California, sits at elevations that the updated modeling shows could be inundated in an extreme tsunami scenario. In the East Bay, a worst-case tsunami could bring flooding to sizable areas of Oakland, Berkeley, and Alameda, reaching up to 18 feet above sea level according to the California Geological Survey's assessment. And then there's the northern California coast, the Eureka area, Humboldt Bay, where the tsunami hazard overlaps with the Cascadia subduction zone threat in a way that makes it the most acute near-field tsunami scenario on the California coast. Humboldt Bay has low-lying terrain around its margins, communities built close to sea level, and a location directly in the path of tsunami waves that a Cascadia megathrust earthquake would send southward down the Pacific coast. The California Geological Survey estimates that flooding could reach up to 30 feet above the average high tide along the outer coast of Humboldt Bay and the Eureka area, in a worst-case Cascadia tsunami scenario. 30 feet above high tide, in a community that has been built at sea level for generations. The evacuation challenge that represents, in a community where the roads leading away from the coast have to cross the same low-lying terrain that would be inundated by the tsunami, is one of the most serious life safety planning challenges on the entire West Coast. Virginia Tech researchers published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that added a specific and alarming dimension to the Cascadia tsunami scenario for California. Their research found that a Cascadia megathrust earthquake would not just produce a tsunami, it would cause the coastal land along Northern California, Oregon, and Washington to sink by up to 6.5 feet, a phenomenon called coseismic subsidence, where the land that has been pushed upward by the subduction plate suddenly drops when the fault ruptures and the pressure is released. That 6.5 feet of sudden land subsidence would dramatically amplify the tsunami inundation beyond what the current tsunami inundation maps show, because those maps were calculated for the current ground elevation, not for the post-earthquake ground elevation that would be 6 feet lower. The researchers found that when you account for the land subsidence combined with a Cascadia tsunami, the area of coastal land at risk of flooding expands from 35 square miles to 116 square miles in the affected zone, putting more than 14,000 additional residents, 22,500 additional structures, and 777 additional miles of roads underwater, beyond what the current inundation maps show. Y'all, let me bring this down to the level of what it means for individual people and individual communities, because the numbers and the percentages and the square miles of projected inundation are important for policy, but they become real for human beings at the level of specific places and specific decisions. If you live in Marina del Rey, a community that the California Geological Survey specifically identified as having few roads for evacuation and significant tsunami inundation risk, do you know where your tsunami evacuation route goes? If you live in the Embarcadero neighborhood of San Francisco, in a building that is now within the updated tsunami hazard zone, do you know what the siren sounds like and what the correct response is when you hear it? If you live in a cliffside home in Carlsbad or Palos Verdes or Big Sur, or in a home that was built with the assumption that the cliff beneath it would be there for the next 100 years, do you understand what the current rate of cliff retreat means for the timeline of when that assumption will be proven wrong? The California Governor's Office of Emergency Services held Tsunami Preparedness Week in March 2026 and encouraged every California resident to find out whether they live in a tsunami hazard zone using the My Hazards tool. The tool is free. It takes 5 minutes. And the information it provides, whether your home, your workplace, your children's school is within a tsunami inundation zone, is the starting point for every preparedness decision that coastal California residents need to make. Find out your zone. Know your evacuation route. Know what direction high ground is from every place you spend significant time. And if you live on or near a coastal cliff, talk to a licensed geotechnical engineer about the stability of the bluff beneath or above your property, because the rate of cliff retreat documented by the USGS is not uniform. It varies enormously by location, and the specific vulnerability of your specific property is something that a site assessment can determine in ways that general statistics cannot. The coast of California is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I have never looked at a photograph of Big Sur or watched the sun set over the Pacific from a cliff edge somewhere on the Central Coast without understanding exactly why tens of millions of people have chosen to build their lives near that ocean. The beauty is real. The danger is also real. And the most honest thing I can do for the people who love that coast is to make sure they understand what is coming, what is already happening, and what the science says the trajectory looks like, so that they can make informed decisions about their lives, their investments, their preparedness, and their communities. That is what this video is for, and as always, stay safe out there. I love y'all.